we start already? Sorry.
Hey everybody, welcome to a conversation on First Peter. We're continuing this week on, I don't even know what section we're on.
We're in chapter 3, 13 to 22.
Yeah.
Finishing up chapter 3.
Finishing up.
Yeah. I was reading through all of it and it feels like Peter's such a short book, but it's, again, like all these older books, like they're packed full of things that we're supposed to be living out, and it's easy to read a sentence, hard to live it out, I think. And so like I was reading through 1 Peter 3:13 a bit, and some of the big points that the scripture talks about is how do we live our life in a way that impacts how the outside world views us, and how do we live holy lives? How do we, kind of keep our selfish desires at bay or have self-control. I feel like that's a big way. Like, I don't know. I feel like I just struggle with that sometimes. And then just being respectful of people, honoring people, and like the time that they're living in, the time that I think it would be a really tough time to be respectful of people because of just what the government is. I mean, Nero is the emperor at this time. He's hurting people. It's kind of the beginning of when he's the emperor, but he's hurting Christians. He's persecuting people. And then where Peter is writing to them and saying, live holy lives in spite of all of this. Live respectful of people. Have self-control. Even though these people outside are doing this, how you act impacts how they view you. Yeah. And I when I read it, and I've been watching a show on Hulu that's kind of talking about the Holocaust, and just kind of visually seeing people in extreme persecution, I would have a really tough time living the way Peter's calling them to live. Like, I don't know. It feels really complicated.
And there's another layer to this too, is that during this time they would have, the church would have started meeting in catacombs and graveyards. Their household structure didn't look the same as the culture around them, and so there's definitely a lot of writing at this time that calls out Christians as being disruptors of society. Mm-hmm. And Peter makes a really good drive here to be like, live lives that are good mm-hmm. and that treat people well. As like how can people talk bad about you when they know you and they see the good things that you're doing?
Yeah.
How does a person decide what, like, attributes, or I guess attributes is probably the best word. How does somebody decide what is important to them and what's not? Like, maybe the easiest way to think about it is like if somebody is in the dating world, they look for certain attributes in people. How do people decide what is important and what's not important?
How? Man, like some of that feels so ingrained in your personality. Like, I think something that's important to you is super different than something that's important to me. So it's really, that's a tough question, I feel like.
Yeah, I just I feel like this part is about trying to grow as people. Yeah. And I think some people are going to have things in life that they value more, mm-hmm. certain attributes they value more. And what responsibility do we have to learn to value things we don't necessarily value? Yeah. Or how do we grow things that is harder for us to for sure. actually see a lot of value in?
Yeah. Well, and I think for me, something I've been thinking a lot about, and even just in reading 1 Peter, like I know you all know this, but I'm a pretty emotionally driven person. Never seen it. I know. It's a shock. But I think with that, like being kind of driven by your emotions can kind of lead me to be someone that has a hard time with self-control, or has a hard time in, I don't know what the right word is, but I guess self-control is the easiest way to say that, where it's like, how I react, or how, am I going to eat well? Am I going to be healthy? Am I going like for doing what I should do versus what I want to do? Or like, if I want to, like, let's say I'm having a hard day and I just want to like veg out on the couch all day and pretend like there's no responsibilities in the world. Like, that's not necessarily healthy for me or my family or my community. And just having, and like thinking about people in these circumstances, like what they want to do versus what they're actually going to do. Like, that's, I don't know. I feel like I'm talking in circles, but that's really hard.
Well, there's like the complexity of knowing, of like, okay, why do you do something? Is it, do you make a decision based on like just your gut feeling?
Yeah.
Or do you make a decision based on spending time to collect all the information to know it's the right decision, if that's even possible?
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty large spectrum for people, and I feel like people land all over it. Because I can be pretty analytical, but at some point I just go, this is just what I feel like.
You have to at some point make a decision.
But other people get paralyzed by not having all the info, and other people just fully go based on what they feel. And just.
I definitely, I mean, I would go on the opposite end. I definitely go more based on what I feel, which isn't always helpful, like.
Yeah, neither of those extremes is necessarily.
Yeah, and sometimes, like even as a group, like if we have decisions to be made and we just go based on our feelings or whatever, like that can lead to some not very good. Like, we need both sides. It's super important to have both.
How do you, going back to my previous question then, as a person who leans more towards the feeling side, how do you grow that other side? Or how do you, not necessarily in your own ability, but even just seeing the value in that?
I think it's having some bad consequences. I think just like, I mean, like that's one of the things we're talking about with Peter is him growing over time. Like, I think he's made some decisions probably early on in life that led to some bad consequences. And as he got older, he goes, oh, wait, I have to slow down. I have to think about this. I have to process what's this going to look like if I cut off this soldier's ear? Maybe that's not the best decision. And I don't know. I do think that natural consequences in life help us learn a lot. Sometimes it stinks that it has to be that way, and it doesn't have to be that way, but definitely think that helps.
Yeah. Well, I think in all of these attributes that Peter brings up, that being able to self-reflect is pretty valuable. Which, to be fair to these people that he's talking to, is pretty difficult to do when your world is chaos. When everything sucks around you, the last thing you want to do is look at yourself and go, yeah, I suck too.
I suck too.
I'm part of it.
Oh, are you kidding me? I know.
It's a pretty tough reality.
That's a really actually interesting way to put it, because it's when I think, like, for me, or I'm hoping other people, not just me, but like when you're in a situation that's really tough, it's really easy to see how everyone else needs to change and not go, okay, how do I need to change to make this better? Like in marriage, in relationships, in team, and all these things, like what do I need to do? And I think we all have these huge blind spots in our lives that it's really, I don't know, it's really easy to not see the whole picture of who you are, and how your imperfections play out in team dynamics.
We talked last week or the week before, we talked a lot about coping mechanisms, and a lot of times it's a coping mechanism to blame other people.
For sure.
Because if you're in a tough situation, you put it all on yourself, that can be really overwhelming. And so sometimes to get through stuff, you have to believe that somebody else is the problem.
What were you going to say, Ty?
I think when I was doing my internship for my interpreting degree, I got to go to an AA meeting, and they have I don't know, they don't always call it prayer, but they recite it at the end, and there's a part of that that's really
serenity.
The serenity, where there's a really important idea where it's and I found it later again in the circles of control. This idea, like you have like the things that you can concern yourself about, the weather, war around the world, but like you really can't affect or change those things. Like your circle of influence of like what are things that like you can maybe change the course, but it's you don't have your hands on the steering wheel. And then this idea like what are the things that like you directly have control over. In this season, like my wife and I are really talking a lot about these things. There's a lot that with with pregnancy and baby and all that, and just, health, there's just a lot of it. It's like, we can worry about it, natural for us to worry about the health of my wife and the health of baby number 2, but it's like also like just like reminding yourselves, like, the things that we worry about are always the things that we can control. And the same things with like our growth and our development. And there's sometimes there's things that we can be worried about. It's like, what are the things that are in your control to change? Yeah.
I find that's a very hard thing for people to like wrap their head around, even in like things of no consequence, like just like think disc golf or any sports. It's so easy to find a reason why you didn't perform the way that you wanted to perform. And it's so easy to be like, if it wasn't windy, if that tree wasn't there, if whatever, if I had this disc or whatever, like there's all these different things. And the reality is no, if you just like prepared better, if you reflected better, if you learned more, if you did something different, you are literally the only person that can change your reality.
Which is really hard. Like it's hard to feel, for me at least, I feel like it's really hard to feel like, like in relationships, if there's things that are happening, it's really hard to feel, this lack of control over how to like, because there's always, not always, but when there's 2 people, like you can only control yourself. But like if you want to fix something or you want to make something better with somebody else and you can't control how they're going to react or how they're going to, like, that's a really, I don't know, for me, that's really hard.
Well, it's so vulnerable.
It's so vulnerable. And I love that.
And then there's also the level of, there's things that impact you directly. And you did everything that was in your control. And there's still nothing more that you can do. Like disc golf we have in common, like you can still choose the right disc, you can still whatever, and you can't always predict the gust of wind. Budget shortfalls, projects going longer than they were predicted.
Yeah, and that's the people that Peter's talking to. Yeah. It's like he's going, hey, I get it. Yeah. Like there's a lot of stuff out of your control that's making life hard and making life miserable. And I see why you can just focus on that, and you can dig yourself a hole, and you can run and hide, and you can whine about it. Yeah. But let's actually reflect and see, let's actually...
it's about our response.
Let's do what we can.
Yeah.
Let's do what we can.
I think, go ahead.
Work on yourself, and then the answer is dig into the culture more. Yeah. Their answer isn't to turn away, to be uninvolved, but it's be so involved in doing good things and becoming good people that when people talk bad about you or they try to do things against you, they feel bad about it.
Yeah, or they see that it's maybe they were wrong, which is also hard because, okay, so like I was reading this and it felt like this. They were talking about doing good and what that meant. And part of it was like, how are they doing good in society at this time? And like this little paragraph just said, it was like, some of the things they were doing was supplying grain in times of necessity, forcing down prices by selling things in the market below asking rate, building public buildings, making old buildings beautiful, refurbishing the theater, widening roads, helping in construction of public utilities, going in the embassies to gain privilege for the city, helping in the city in times of civil upheaval, which like that list of things feels like all things that, we can or have had a moment of impact in as just people trying to do something good in community, but also in doing those things, you are like, that's when you're vulnerable to make mistakes. You know what I mean? That's when like, I know for like with neighborhood work, like there's been so many times someone is frustrated with me because I didn't do something fast enough or they, whatever. There's a list. Let me tell you, there's a list. And it's frustrating sometimes because like you're trying to do good and you're trying to do something that benefits society. And then somebody gets mad at you about it. And you're like, my insides are like, I'm trying so hard here. And why can't it just be, it's so easy to go into that mode. But like, that's the moment where those are the moments where you're kind of pushed into a corner where it's like, okay, how am I going to, this is the moment to like live out who Christ is calling me to be. Cause like, I'm going to be pushed into a corner. People are going to get mad at me. I'm going to be frustrated. And that's like, those stressors that kind of bring up who you really are, or like the real internal stuff that's going on. Like, you can't get better, if that's the right word, without being pushed into a corner sometimes. Like, if we're hiding and not doing anything, I can be a really great person if there's no stress in my life. But when we're doing things that cause stress, are overwhelming, or in society, like I think those are the moments where we're like, okay, like this is how I grow. This is how I become more mature. Yes, I'm going to screw it up sometimes. And then I have to think about, okay, next time, how am I going to do this better? How am I going to respond better? How do I keep doing this better? And like, you can either retreat and be like, this was too hard, and everyone was mad and didn't like what I did. Or you can say, okay, yes, that didn't go great. I responded probably poorly. How do I grow in this? How do I become more? And like, also, like, even grander than all of this is, how do we say, it doesn't really matter so much how people were responding to me. It's so much more about who God says I am. And so if somebody is mad or frustrated, and like, I can somehow be more, like, thinking more about who God is telling me to be, how does that impact me? How do I live in that space?
Like, Peter's challenge is about self-reflection.
Yeah.
Realizing what areas we each on our own need growth in, understanding that thing. And if you're doing that practice, it becomes really easy when somebody gets frustrated with you, because you go, I know that I did my best.
Yeah.
I know that even when I mess up, that I did it for the right reasons.
Yeah.
I know that I'm trying to get better.
Yeah.
And so they're upset, fine. But I know I have this like base level understanding of who I am and who God is and who I'm growing in that. And so how they react that's their issue.
Yeah.
I'm continue to go on. And so if like this is a normal practice for you, I feel like it builds almost like this confidence in knowing who you are, who you're trying to become, who you were, like being able to see that self-growth in yourself. Yeah. Like I still to this day, I hate public speaking. And I used to be terrible at it. And I wouldn't say I'm terrible at it anymore. I'm fine. I'm comfortable, whatever. I wouldn't say I'm great, but I can do it. But like if somebody came to church and was like, oh, Greg's he's just bad at speaking. I know my story and like, okay, whatever. Like, that's fine. Like, that would not affect me at all. Cause I've gotten better. I put time in. I've learned a bunch of stuff. I've done it for years. So like, I'm like, I know my story and my background and my relation to it. And so that takes the sting away, I guess.
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
That's good. I like that.
I was just reflecting on before the launch of Uptown. I guess the kind of relaunch when you joined the Corner team. And Corner was just North Loop for 6 months or something like that.
Yeah, 6 months.
And you and Scott would share and split the message. Just how much you've grown since then.
That was tough.
I mean, it wasn't. I don't think the problem is that like I was studying public speaking and sermon prep and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Homiletics, all those fancy words. Yeah. At the time, so like it's one of those things where it's like you're on the worship team and you mess up, you miss a quarter or a note or something like that. Most people are. It's going to go like right over their heads.
Yeah.
It's really only the people who are.
Musicians and stuff. Yeah.
But no, this is cool to see how far you've come, and there's a noticeable difference. This song has like been side by side the whole almost decade now. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's like so much more value in like somebody who's been seeing your experience in something for a long time versus somebody who just like steps in and like has a snapshot and like I think of like I know I'm trying not to say too much, but the neighborhood stuff. Yeah. Some of the struggles of some of the people there, they haven't known you that long.
Right.
They've seen a snapshot and they've made judgments based on a snapshot.
Yeah.
And that's fine. People are going to do that.
Yeah.
We make judgments in life. That's what we do.
Yeah.
That's how we know what's safe and what's not. But like, give it time. Like,
right.
Like a lot of those relationships, those things that we want to do that we're bad at first, it just takes time.
Yeah.
It just takes time.
It for sure does.
I didn't mean you're bad at the neighborhood.
No.
I was trying
you were great.
both things at the same time.
You were totally great. I think that in the other side of that, and maybe something I am currently processing through, is like Jesus called us all to be peacemakers, and like when there is these disagreements, or how we handle it is super important. And then what does that conversation, is there a conversation that takes place after? How do you, when is it valuable to be a peacemaker? When is it important to just let things go? That kind of stuff. Like, how do we do our best to live at peace with everybody? And that's a hard one.
Complicated.
It's complicated. We don't have to do the whole thing, but yeah, it is
but
complicated.
I feel like
yeah,
there's not a bullet list of how to be a peacemaker.
No.
Like in some relationships, it is just letting stupid things go.
Yeah.
In other relationships, it is actually being confrontational.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah. And sometimes it's like people confront you. It's fun. It's fun.
I like confrontation, so.
You do? Okay. I'm not a fan. What were you saying about feeling safe and not safe? I don't like it. But I think this last question, and I think we kind of summed it up, is how do you set yourself to be a person of Christ-like character in challenging moments? And I think, just what we talked about today.
I think the hardest part for me in that question is not avoiding challenging moments.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like if I'm going to do the work to set myself up for it, I also should not avoid them.
Yeah.
Because they exist and it's easy to run.
Yeah.
It's easy to think you're being Christ-like when all you're doing is avoiding what's hard.
Yeah. For me, it's like learning how to react slower. I feel a little like Peter sometimes. I think like this whole impulsive piece, and Peter being a little reactionary, and like that feels like me. So like, I think like, Scott was writing some of it, and in the beginning he said, he was talking about Peter, and one of the things that when I was reading through some things, it was just Peter was known for diving headfirst into situations, which can be great and can also be really not great.
Yeah.
And just knowing how to handle that well in myself, I think is super fun.
Yeah, it can cause a lot of injury.
Mm-hmm. Little concussions, things like that.
I just was watching a video of somebody who's a quadriplegic because they dove into too shallow of a pool.
Ooh.
So diving in head first is not always safe.
The best decision.
Not always safe. Yeah. Which is probably why you like to dive in head first, but that's probably why you also like to know what's happening, because it's like you want to know how deep the water is and all that, like what's dangerous in there, so that you can dive in. Yeah. Versus somebody who's wading in, they don't need to know all the information.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So,
how do you do both? How about you, Ty? Any final thoughts?
Your ties wrap up?
Yeah.
Ties wrap up.
Yeah, cue the music.
I still have to sing it.
Our huge production budget.
I sang a little song for you. Good.
I think something that's really important in this effort is having that person you can go to with like an open fridge policy. It's that friend who can walk into any moment in your life and they don't have to ask. They can just open the fridge and see what's inside. And I think that it's really easy in self-reflection to almost like self-help. Like, I'm going to make myself better. I'm going to make myself better. But a big thing is just in these challenging moments, it's really easy to beat yourself up or to pat yourself on the back. But having that person who's like outside of you, who can look at it and go, yeah, you're on track, who can kind of coach you along.
Yeah.
It's super important. So I think, self-reflection, super big. That's huge. But having people who can reflect along with you and help kind of guide you, who can check you, who you can ask honest questions with and just bear all.
Yeah.
It's good. Cool. See you guys next week.
Thank you.